I'd like to thank the co-sponsors of today's lecture, the Department of Philosophy and the Philosophy of Religions Club. It's always a great pleasure to welcome, speaking for the Lumen Christi Institute, Professor Luc Marion, who is the faculty member at the University of Chicago who's been most involved and most influential in the work of the Institute since its founding 15 years ago. As a kind of sign of his dedication to the work of Lumen Christi Institute, he is speaking tonight despite suffering from the after effects of the flu, no doubt beyond the point of contagion. But we're very grateful for him making yet another sacrifice for the sake of the work that we serve. Luc Marion is professor at the Divinity School, the Committee on Social Thought, and the Department of Philosophy at the University of Chicago. He's professor emeritus of modern philosophy and metaphysics at the University of Paris-Sorbonne. He's a member of the Académie française. Among his many books are In the Self's Place, The Approach of St. Augustine, God Without Being, and The Erotic Phenomenon. So I'd like to invite you to join me in welcoming Luc Marion to speak to us this evening on the topic of philosophy and martyrdom, Tertullian and Justin Martyr.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure, as a duty, to be the obedient servant to the leader of the Lumen Christi Institute, and I yield to the orders given to me by Thomas Levergood with always great pleasure, and it is a second nature to me to do exactly what he asked me to do. So today, I would like quickly and briefly to share with you my astonishment about an obvious fact in the history of Christian theology. We take for granted that Christian faith ends up into theology, and that theology is perhaps science, perhaps the highest science, but a science in distinction or in opposition to other sciences, among them philosophy. And so we take for granted, in a way or another, that there is a divide which can be bridged, should be bridged. Some argue that it should not, but that's another question, between reason and faith. We have faith on one side, which is a case of religious creed and of the original Christian stand against the Word of God, and reason, which is another way to consider the real world, including possibly God. This distinction, although well established and taken for granted by most of us, and with good reason, in fact is very much questionable. It is questionable for many reasons. The first being that until the 12th century, no Christian thinker has ever called what he was doing theology. I mean, the greatest period of theology as we understand it now. that of the Cappadocian Fathers, of Augustine, of Origen, of Dionysius, and so on. They were not using the word of theology to describe what they were doing. It is with, in fact, Abélard, and after Abélard, Thomas Aquinas and others, who slowly and lately impose the word theology. Why? Because it is only after a long period that the word of philosophy itself was used to distinguish the science from what we call now theology. In fact, the opposition between philosophy and theology was mostly framed at the moment when two events happened. The first was the rediscovery, or the discovery of the second discovery of Aristotle, with the translation in late 20th century, early 13th century, which imposed the word of philosophy and metaphysics, and on the other hand, the fact that the creation of the universities made clear that there was two levels of knowing, of knowledge, to be distinguished: the facultas theologiae, faculty teaching theology, the creed, the sacra disciplina, the sacra pagina, the Bible and the commentaries of the Bible, the revelation, as we say now, and on the other hand, a preparatory teaching, which was the faculty of arts, that is, including geometry, arithmetic, music, astronomy, and also rhetoric, grammar, and dialectic. This faculty of art grew into, among other things, the faculty of philosophy. So, for institutional reasons, as well as because of the rediscovery of the corpus of Aristotle, the distinction between philosophy and theology imposed itself. But we have to consider this paradox, that most of what we now used to call the real, original Christian theology, before the division between the West and the East, before the division of Reform and Catholics, all this great period we all take for our heritage, no one among the main authorities and the main authors claimed to be a theologian. This is puzzling. And so we should be careful when we assume, for instance, the distinction between philosophy and theology. Most of the people who agree to discuss on that basis have no historical expertise and don't see how modern, how perhaps questionable this distinction is. But this is not my main point. This is only the introduction to another positive discovery, a discovery which is well known indeed among scholars. It is the fact that during the two first centuries of Christian era, that is during the period when Christianity was in no way a majority, when Christianity was only one of the small post or peri-Judaism movements. The Christians, that is, the period during the two first century unto the shift made by the Emperor Constantine when he decided to make legal Christianity in the Roman Empire. That is, with the edict of Milano, which is 314 or 24, something like that. 313, thank you. So, during those 2 centuries and some years, what was the situation of the Christians? We could have imagined that during this period, when they were submitted to persecution, how large, how constant this persecution, how deep this persecution was, in which parts of the empire, when exactly, this is an open question for historians. But it was a very significant period, very long period, more than 2 centuries. What was the intellectual, so to speak, strategy, the media plan of the Christians at that period? What did they decide to say? To either support their claim, to try to get some fair treatment, and so on. If we refer to the scriptures, which is not that easy because at that period the canon of the New Testament, as of the Old Testament, was not yet established. We could indeed imagine a very precise scenario, very likely. It would be that they were persecuted because they were Christians, and there was no question that the Christians were supposed to be the universal suspects for any crime and any crisis. So they were exactly what everyone would like to hate. And so there was not even any need of legal procedure to condemn them. In that case, we could imagine that the Christian would have referred to the situation described by in the New Testament, for instance, the first chapter of the first epistle by Paul to the Corinthians, saying on one side there is the Logos of God, the truth, the reason, the verbum Dei, which appears as a folly and craziness to the Word, and on the other side the Logos of the Word, which is made a craziness by the Logos of God. We could imagine something like the beginning, the opening chapter of the Epistle to the Romans, where Paul says that although God made clear attempt to manifest his will in creation, in the visible things, men were unable to see what God has manifested, and so they became, they turned back from God and were completely blind to God's will. This could have been the correct tactic, that is to, in order to translate this in a more modern 20th century rhetoric, to say, to use the theology of kerygma, of the announcement of the good news, the kerygma, as a contradiction to the rational, allegedly rational discourse of the word as such. On one side, the Word of God, on the other side, the rationality of the pagans with a conflict. This intellectual conflict reflecting the juridical conflict between the Christians and the empire. And there is many cases in the history of Christianity and history of the world where we, the Christians, have experienced this strategy. To my great surprise, in fact it is not, I should not have been surprised by that because it is well documented and obvious, but ignorance allows us to experience some surprise even late in your lifetime. So to my great ignorance and surprise, I discovered that this was precisely not the strategy used by the first Christian writers. On the contrary, if we go to the generation, the third generation after Paul, that is with the apostolic and mostly apologetic fathers, what do we discover? I refer here to the generation of Justin Martyr, who published his Apologies in 153-55, to Tertullian, in Greek, to Tertullian, Justin, Rome, Greek, 153-55. The two apologies, in fact, it is only one apology. And the other great witness I would pick out is Tertullian, Latin, Carthago, the end of 2nd century, the Apologeticus, 197. Between them, there is a lot of others. The most well-known are Aristide of Asini with the Apology, Tatian, against the Greeks in the middle of the 2nd century, Athenagoras from Alexandria, the Apology for the Christians around 177, and some few others. I would take a final point, that is my hypothesis, which is not completely established by the community of scholars, but I think it's very likely that the last example of this strategy was Augustine, the City of God. The City of God, which was, as you know, written in the beginning of the 5th century. That is very much later than the period we consider. But it is a crucial moment, not because to be a Christian was allowed in the empire, that because the empire was destroyed by the invasion of the Visigoth and the Ostrogoth. So there is the same question: what is the relation between the Christians and the empire? What the authors of that period, and I shall focus on Justin and Tertullian, shared in common? What was their choice? Their choice was to argue precisely. The Confessio Fidei, the confession of faith, which is a formulation which was in fact established for the first time, strictly speaking, with all its different meaning by Augustine. The Confessio Fidei, that is the double confession, the fact to confess the faith, to confess, to speak out the creed, the Symbolum Apostolorum, and at the same moment to confess your own sins. And there is a direct connection between both. Because if you don't confess your own sin, you are not in a situation of truth. You hide something because you are a sinner. And if you are a sinner and you don't admit it, you cannot say anything which could be trusted about God. So your creed could not be trusted if you don't say the truth about yourself. So there is a direct connection between the two confessiones. And this is something which is perhaps largely forgotten today by many believers. That is, in fact, you cannot say, I believe in God, if you don't admit that you are not God. And to admit that you are not God is just to admit that you commit sins. Because only God is without sin. So there is a direct connection between both. This confessio filii was not achieved on the ground of the mere kerygma, the mere announcement of the kingdom of God. The announcement of the kingdom of God was made by Christ, not by the believers. To some extent, they are not qualified to say the kerygma. They can teach what was said, but they are not qualified to make themselves the announcement of the good news of the Evangelium. What they can do, what they should do, is to, according to the tactic of the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 17, the speech of Paul in Académie, that is to argue. And Paul was arguing with, it is one of the very few quotation of the philosopher with the philosophers. So it's stoikoi and skeptikoi. So in the New Testament there is not a lot of philosophers who are, who are called by their name. It is the case. That is, the question is to argue with the pagans, to do what any human mind can do and is supposed to do. And the motto of the discussion can be borrowed from the famous formulation of the first epistle to Peter, by Peter, chapter 3, verse 15. Be ready always to give an answer, etoimoi aes, an answer to every man that asks you a reason for the hope that is in you. This is the official translation. Indeed, the Greek is far better, and it's supposed to be etoimoi ai pros apologian, panti aiunti humas, logon perites enemin elpidos. Be ready for the apology. That is the argumentation, the speech to plead for, to give an apology to anyone asking you for the logos, the reason of the hope which is in you. And let us focus on this formulation. It is an apologia for the logos. You have twice the idea of argumentation and argument. What a Christian is supposed to do is to argue. Argue in favor of the Logos. And the Logos is not only his doctrine, it is the name of God for the Christian. So the Christian is someone who, when condemned or under scrutiny or close to be put to death, does not shout, does not fight back, but say only this: please let us discuss. Let us be rational. And we have a very good example of that, which is extraordinary, by Justin. Justin was born in Palestine. He was not a Jew, he was a Greek and a Christian, but with a very good knowledge of Judaism. So I had this dialogue with Rabbi Trifo, which is one of the first serious dialogues between Christians and Jews, very important. And he was a professional philosopher. He was making his living by teaching philosophy. First in Palestine, in Naples, and then in Rome. And he was successful enough to have a crowd attending his class, and to be attacked by a pagan philosopher, indeed, who was both his rival in philosophy and a pagan against the Christians. The result was that he was accused to be an unlawful citizen and was sent to martyrdom and things like that. Okay. And he published in the middle of the second century, a two-part apology, which is based on this principle, and you should read that if you have not yet. It is an apology to the emperor. And the emperor in that time was Adrian the Pious. He had two sons, adopted sons. One of them will become, at the death of Adrian, Marcus Aurelius, the great emperor, philosopher, Stoic, who proved to be one of the worst prosecutors and killer of the Christians. This saint man was in fact a monster in killing the Christians. I don't like Marc Aurel. And the first reason why I don't like him is not because he was a slaughterer of Christians. Many others have done that, but because he was a bad philosopher, a very bad philosopher. And when I was student, I have to take a compulsory exam, and on the program there was the diary, self-diary of Marc Aurelius. He has written that in Greek, and he was not very good in Greek. It was a bad Greek by a Latin writer doing more politics than literature. So it is in bad Greek. So it is bad philosophy in bad Greek by a guy who has slaughtered the Christians. So it is not a good guy for me. I have to admit I'm not objective. And it is even, for me, a criterion. If you see a philosopher who is very, very fascinated by Marc Aurel, be careful, he's not a good philosopher. Anyway, enough with Marc Aurel. But Marc Aurel had, as one of his official titles, emperor and philosopher. And Justin argued this way. Well, you claim to be a philosopher. I am a professional philosopher. Let us be serious. Let us have a philosophical discussion about the reason why you put to trial and to death Christians. Are you ready? And it starts that way. And this was a very strong beginning, referring indeed to something well known by everyone, to the statement made by Plato in the Politeia, Book 5, where Plato says, a perfect city would be a city where the kings would be philosophers, or the philosophers kings. And it was indeed under this rule that Mark Aurelius and Anthony the Pious claimed the title of philosophers. So, Justin was at a very strong position. You are a philosopher, and you are the right king, that is your legitimacy. You are a good king, a good emperor, because you claim to be a philosopher. He was not arguing that they were not philosophers. He said, yes, you are a philosopher, let us assume that. Now, let us discuss. It's the same thing than Pascal, when Pascal said, it is in the Pensée, classification of Lafuma 103, ne pouvant faire que ce qui est juste fut fort, on a fait que ce qui est fort fut juste, soit juste. As it is impossible to make that what is just be strong, let us at least make that what is strong be just. So the philosophia is a rule even for political power. But this means that the philosophia is not just to argue, it is to be just. You have to argue according to justice. And Justin always says that philosophia should be eusebia philosophia. Eusebia, that is pious. That is moral, ethical, pious. Exactly the title of the emperor, who was Antonios Eusebius, a pious philosophy. So what does that mean for philosophy to be pious? Be careful, because this is a very crucial today situation. Should philosophy be ethical or not? Is it a requirement of a good philosophy to be ethical or not? A large part of political philosophy is divided today about that criterion. You have some say philosophy is morally neutral, and others say that if it is not ethical, it is not a true philosophy. So the question is central. And what does that mean to have an ethical philosophy? Eusebia philosophia. Here Justin was very wise again. He was a very good philosopher, tricky guy, because he made a comparison. The comparison is that we, the Christians, we are condemned, or at least prosecuted, or at least sent to trial, because we are said to be atheists. So before discussing this accusation of atheism, let us focus on another point. We are accused to be atheists, but in the past, when there was no Christians, you, the pagans, already condemned to death someone under the crime of atheism. And that one was Socrates. You have condemned Socrates because he has corrupted the youth, as you accuse us to corrupt the youth, young people, and because he was not paying his respect by making sacrifices to the god of the city. And you accuse us exactly of the same thing. And so he refers to that in the second apology, 10:5 and 6:3. He speaks about, and what is very, very striking, that referring to Socrates, comparing, saying that after all, the Christians are only some few centuries later the new Socrates. They tell the truth and you send them to death. But we are sent to death just because we say the truth and we are rational, you are not. That's the argument. And what is fascinating is that in the Apologia, same title, for Socrates, written by Plato, many centuries before the Christians. It is in Apology for Socrates 28a, for those who would like to check. Plato makes in the mouth of Socrates the following words. It is this accusation which has already condemned many good men and which in the future will condemn, no doubt, much more others. Polus kai alus kai egatus andras. Many others good men. The same accusation, Plato says, Socrates says according to Plato, the same accusation which will lead me to death will lead in the future many other good men. So as if, this is not quoted by Justin, but as if Plato had foreseen the fate of the Christians. That is, the claim raised by Justin was just expressed in advance by Plato. So the question is, when you condemn Christians, be careful. You have already done, against Socrates, a huge juridical error. It was the blunder which is the shame of the so-called democracy of Athene. You are just in the process of repeating that. And there is the argument, when you condemn Christian, be careful, you condemn yourself in the face of history. Remind this word by Solzhenitsyn. We used to say, and at the moment when he said that, it was still in Soviet Union under Brezhnev. It could be seen as a craziness. He said, well, in some few years people will ask, who was that guy Brezhnev? He was perhaps a contemporary of Solzhenitsyn, which is exactly what we think now. The important guy was Solzhenitsyn, not Brezhnev. And we pay attention to Antonius the Pious or to Mark Aurel because they have unjustly prosecuted the Christians and not the reverse. Would they not have done that, they could be completely forgotten. So the situation is that when you act not only in an unjust way, but in an irrational way, you condemn yourself. So it's about the argumentation, and to the point that this claim, if you condemn us without good reasons, and you have no good reasons, you condemn yourself. This is the beginning of the apology and the final argument of the apology as well. And Tertullian used this on a regular basis. It is exactly the argument of Socrates in the Apologia. You condemn me because I've broken the law. No, you are breaking the law. I'm the only one to follow up the law unto the end. You condemn me, I follow the law, I accept to die. You are ready to give me the possibility to escape my death. No, that's your law. I obey the law. But by obeying the law, I condemn you. Same thing for the Christians. So the point comes to this conclusion, which is strange, where Justin says, so we are the real heirs of Socrates. Which means that as the philosopher, what the philosophers are among the Greeks, that is the only one to tell the truth, which are condemned by the rest of the Greeks, because as we shall see, they are atheists. They say that the gods are not divine, that the law of the cities are not just, and things like that. Those are the philosophers among the Greeks. Among the barbares, those who are not the Greeks, who are the equivalent of the philosopher? Those who say the truth, those who are more rational than the other, the Christians. So you have First Apology, chapter 7:3. We, the Christians, are the equivalent of the philosopher among the non-Greeks. That is, we are the keepers of rationality, and you are not rational. And this can be verified with two others claims that made by Tertullian. Tertullian, some 30 years later, 40 years later, put the question not only on the field of philosophy, but he was a jurist on the field of law, on the ground of law. And he says that the Christians are those who argue following the law, the common law and the official law. And so I cannot sum up the argumentation of the Liber Apologeticus, but it is based on this very strange formulation. Some Christians were condemned under the crime of being Christians, with no other justification. Just the fact that if you say, I am a Christian, that's enough, you are done. It's like, and the argument, it is in Liber Apologeticus 4:4, non licet esse vos. It is not legal that people like you be. Not non licet esse vos. It is not legal. Licet is a very strong meaning, juridical meaning. It is not legal, it is not allowed that people like you may be. And let us insist on this formulation, non licet esse vos. You know that in France there was a discussion in the years, in the 80s, about some criminals who have prosecuted French resistance, both Jewish and not, in Lyon. And this trial was very important to give a precise definition of the difference between a crime, a war crime, and a crime against humanity. And the distinction between war crimes and crimes against humanity is this. In the war crimes, you do horrible things because the people are your enemies, making no distinction between civilians and warriors and things like that. But in the crimes against humanity, you make horrible things just because people are what they are. It is not what they do. It is not how they behave against you. It is not because they are enemy, combatant, and things like that. It is just because they are what they are. So, non licet esse vos is a definition of the crime against humanity. So, the Christians were condemned just because they were Christians. So, the only thing was to make them admit, acknowledge they were Christian. And there was only one sentence, to death. And it is on this point that Tertullian very strongly argues. That is, in that situation, you are not playing the role of a fair judge anymore. There is no justice if the crime is just the name of a Christian. And so he takes with a great skill and virtuosity many other consequences. He says, usually you submit to torture people to make them acknowledge they are guilty. And if they say yes, you stop to torture them. In the case of the Christian, you torture them unless in order to make them deny that they are Christians. Exactly the reverse. So it's absurd. And in other cases, when the guy, because of the pain, says, yes, I'm guilty, you don't trust him. You start again, you find out other evidences to support his guiltiness. In the case of the Christian, he has just to say, I am not Christian, that's enough, that's okay. You trust him immediately. So you are far out the legal procedure. So your justice is not a justice anymore. You are illegal. So Tertullian makes the same argument than Justin, shifting from mere philosophy, the figure of Socrates, to the question of the legal procedure. And this sheds a light on the third witness, which is Augustine. Many theologians, including Benedict XVI, who emphasized this very early in his career, has noticed an argument of Augustine in The City of God. That is Book 8, Chapter 1. Where he argues against the theology, the three theologies of Varro. Varro was, so to speak, a kind of lawyer and political philosopher, very official and not very serious, as many very official people, who made the distinction. We have lost everything from Varro, except what is quoted by Augustine in this text. There were three kinds of theology. The first theology was the theology civilis, theologia civilis. That is, what all the ceremonies organized in the city to celebrate the gods of the city. I would say the celebration on the investment of the president, a celebration in memory, Memorial Day, the celebration of the investment, how do you say that when the president, the inauguration day, for us, for you, inauguration day, Memorial Day, things like that, which are the liturgy, the theology of the city, and to be an American is to agree to that kind of liturgy. That is the anthem. That is civil, theologia civilis. And there is the theologia of theater, of the poets. The theologia poetorum. The theologia poetorum is stories told about the gods. It would be now the late night show of Lederman, the jokes you make about the sacred people and sacred things you desacralize each day late in the night with a cold beer. And you laugh against the icons which are supposed to be worshipped. And there is the third theologia, which is the theologia naturalis, which is what in nature looks so beautiful, so powerful, so regular, that it gives some hint of the divine. That is the figure of astronomy, the comets, the planets, the thing like that. And this, only that third kind of theology is rational. And Augustine says, we the Christians, we cannot discuss with the two first theologies. Political theology is mere ideology. We would say that now. It is mere ideology. We cannot imagine a moment that those self-celebration of the city are in any way connected to God, related to God, to the true God. About the stories told about the gods, it is a shame, it is disgraceful, it is a mockery, and we should not take this seriously anymore. We don't discuss with that. It is not at our level. The best we could do would be to take seriously, perhaps, the theologia naturalis, which is a part of philosophy, referring in fact to Aristotle, the proof of the existence of God according to the theory of motion at the end of book 8 of the physics. That is to say, the divine is perhaps a divine motor or something like that. So perhaps with science and rational philosophy we could discuss, but only with that. We, the Christians, we are the real philosophers. Why? Because philosophy is the love for wisdom. But wisdom is God, so the real philosopher is the amator Dei. Vera philosophia est amator Dei. Verus philosophus est amator Dei. The true philosopher is the lover of God. Period. So, the only interlocutor which a Christian could admit to discuss with is not a political man, is not a poet or a storyteller. It is a rational thinker, let's say a philosopher. And this is a way to qualify completely the comparison with between the Christian and the philosopher, between the martyr and Socrates. And that means that we should be very serious I take the position of the Christian, the Christians are not supposed to discuss with anyone. I'm very sorry, we have to assume that we are an elite and we don't commit ourselves to discuss with any irrational argument. We start to discuss with serious people. We mean what we say, and when we say something, we mean it. And if people facing us just exercise violence, are unfair, we have just to tell them, you are not serious, you can be unfair to us, you can be unjust, but you are wrong, and we are rational. This leads to a crucial point, which is the point of atheism. I shall have to stop quickly because my former text was too long, but I will insist on this the next point, which is the question of atheism. Again, we should be careful about the question of atheism, because very easily we admit that in the public opinion there is a divide between those who believe in God and those who don't believe in God, and that Christians are among those who believe in God. You can say a majority or minority, but not all men believe in God. But it is not that simple. In the Apologia, Justin, First Apologia 6:1, Justin insists, exactly as Tertullian in the Apologeticus, chapter 24:1 and 27:1, that we are under the accusation of being atheist. We don't admit the gods of the city. And this is true. We are atheists. We are atheists of those gods, of your gods, what you claim to be gods. And we just cannot yield to that. The real, or as Tertullian says, we cannot be said to offense your religion. We just show, make manifest, that there is none. We don't deny your gods, we just say that there are no gods. So the question is not whether you are theist or atheist, the question is about the identity of the gods. And I think this is a very strong point. That to a large part, the opposition experienced by the Christians in larger societies or culture starts from the fact that they are atheists. If we identify what other people takes for an absolute, either under the name of a character, a god, or under a value, any kind of value. And in ideology, there is a lot of values that should not be questioned. The Christian, in that case, appears as an atheist. We should pay attention to the situation of the Christians under the Nazi regime or under the Soviet Union. what they had to deal with was, strictly speaking, idolatry. So they were atheists of those idols, and they were sent to death for that. Indeed. But it was on the fact that they were atheists. And we should not imagine ourselves, if we are Christians, as the spontaneously good-looking believer. In fact, we are deeply skeptics. For us, to believe in a God means that this God deserves really to be trusted as God. And there is not a lot of them who can claim to be a real God. To some extent, only one. Not everyone. Not every society, not every civilization, not every system of thought can claim to put on the table, so to speak, something to be trust to the point to be believed as God. So the ambiguity of atheism is very important to keep in mind. And this is not only a recurring theme in Tertullian and Justin, but as you know, it is also a theme in the New Testament. In Paul, we have the description of the fact that, normally speaking, in a normal situation, all men, that is without the revelation of Christ, all men are in fact atheists. And this is said at least 3 times in Ephesians 2:12, when Paul says, I remind you, when you were no more under the law and no more with the gods of the cities, you were atheoi in cosmo. You were athei, you were without God in the Word, without the revelation. You were without God. Atheism is not that you don't believe in God, that there is no God whom you could believe. And in Galatians 4:8, uk eidotes theon, not knowing what God is. And 1 Thessalonians 4:6, ta me eidota ton theon, those who don't know God. The question of atheism is not we have a modern or postmodern and subjective view of atheism. I believe that 2 and 2 are 4. I believe that there will be a constant increase of the gross national product. I believe that there will be always enough energy to support economical growth. I believe in the expansion of democracy and human rights, and also, in addition, to some extent, I believe that there is some God. So it's my opinion. I believe that. See, or I don't believe, in that case I am an atheist. This is childish and funny, if not ridiculous. Atheism is much more serious. Atheism is the experience that, would I believe, be ready to believe or to trust in God, there is no God at all. No one. That's atheism. Objective atheism. It is not depending on your decision. I believe that a BMW is better than a Buick, or the reverse. It's up to me to decide. I believe that there is a God or not. the Big Bang, I believe, is an argument for the existence of God. No, the Big Bang is in no way an argument for the existence of God. This is childish. No, the question is, with a Big Bang or without a Big Bang, with the DIN or that makes no difference. We are atheoi and cosmo. That's the real point. And the Christians are those able to say, perhaps, if God does not manifest itself to you, you will remain without any God. And you are done. I can tell you. We are that kind of atheist. And after all, it's very consistent that some people get nervous against Christians. Because even those who don't believe in God, because they imagine that it is their choice that makes the difference, even those people are very secure that there are values, ideals, things like that, which is an illusion. The Christians are the more skeptic philosopher ever. And last point, and this is my conclusion, because yes, the question is about this kind of rationality claimed by the first Christians, is that they have to face a final paradox that truth can be rejected because it's obvious. In many discussions between the Christians and the non-Christians, the Christian says, and I think it's very likely as a general view, that if the non-Christians are not convinced by the Christians, it is perhaps because the truth explained by the Christian is not that true. Either it is not exactly the correct thing, there is a misunderstanding of the original gospel, or the argumentation is not exactly appropriate, so they should improve the message to make it more convincing, which is true indeed. But there is another rule about truth, and this rule was explained by many of those authors, Justin, Tertullian, but again, perhaps it is Augustine who explains this the best way. It is in Confessiones 10:34. He says that it is a fact that truth can create hatred. Not only because the guy who comes, the messenger who comes with a bad news is not well received, but just because truth as such, a good news, can be rejected as such. Why? Because in fact, truth has two effects. An obvious truth make me rejoice if what is true is something I long for, I expected, I love, I have some knowledge of, and if I can rejoice with this true, new state of things. But imagine that this new, true state of things just contradict my expectations, deceives my hopes, or worse, make clear that in fact I was hiding bad intention, that I am a liar, robber, a bad guy, and things like that. In that case, this very truth will be not only disturbing for me, but I would hate that truth. And I would try to, not only to resist, but to cover it up. And it is the difference between what he calls the veritas lucens, truth shedding light, as the sun raising and securing the world under his warm light, or the truth veritas redargens, the truth as an accusation. And in many discussions, truth is rejected not because people deny that truth is truth. They reject truth because truth is truth, precisely. All these so sad stories of champions we have lied about doping during years and years. At the end, they hate truth. And when they admit it, that they lied, they have to admit without admitting. It's horrible. Truth can be an ordeal, very painful, and we understand that quite well. So you can resist truth not because you think that truth is not truth. Exactly the reverse. So you can hate truth because you are absolutely convinced that it is true. And it's why you cannot stand against that. So, and this will be my provisional conclusion, what is of interest there is the idea that the Christians facing on the public square, in the public square, other opinions and other convictions. They don't claim to have the right to sustain their own views, which is acceptable, all views are acceptable, and things like that. They just claim to say the truth. So they are rational. They don't oppose violence to violence, don't oppose intellectual violence to physical violence, for instance. Indeed, they don't oppose physical violence to physical violence, but not even intellectual violence to physical violence. They simply argue. But what was discovered by those, I would not say theologians after my first remarks, but let us say theologians nevertheless, those theologians of the first century were very well aware that when you are rational, you don't escape the conflict. Because rationality itself may, time to time, stir up the conflict. The example of Socrates is very good, and there are many others. It's not true only for the Christians, but it is something we have to admit. So the idea of, I would say, in recent political philosophy, the idea of Habermas, and many thinkers in the line online with Habermas, according to which the more your discussion proceeds with rational arguments, the less you will be led to conflicts and contradiction is not true. In fact, it is rationality itself which may create, time to time, a conflict because most of the arguments are not rational. Most of the arguments in the public square are not rational. They are ideological, reflecting interests of some groups, and which after all is perfectly well understandable. I have not a moral stand about that. I just describe. So you can imagine that when you have a bipartisan discussion in the Senate or in the House of Representatives, each side has irrational arguments to support the interests of each side. And I understand that quite well. It's not a scandal. But in that case, there is an irrationality. And it may be well understandable that a rational position could be under attack from both sides. Both sides, because both sides are irrational. So truth does not foster always a peaceful agreement. It can produce the opposition. And so when Christian apologetic takes the role, assumes the role of the argumentation and of philosophy, this does not mean that that Christian apologetic makes a compromise. It may mean exactly the reverse, that Christian apologetic may assume the role of the universal rationality. But the universal rationality is not universally and unanimously always accepted. And there is nothing surprising in that. I think it is the epistemological lesson, one of the most important epistemological lessons we can get from the first fathers of the Church. I thank you for your patience.